All right, so there you have it. What do those college football playoff rankings mean? Got some movement, got some things to look at within the ACC, couple of teams floating around, and within the top 12 there, Clemson at 12. We'll talk about that. No real surprises there when you go 1 through 4, probably 1 through 6, depending on how you felt about Notre Dame and Miami. Things are getting real right now. With one game left in the regular season, this is the part of the year now where I think you can actually have real outrage. Because you watch the rankings, and listen, I love the ranking show. I was telling some of our guys here in the office, like, this is, I think, a much more compelling rankings reveal show with 12 teams now. But, like, if you're outraged the first rankings, like, let's not put on the act so much. Like, we understand there's a lot of ball left. Now, though, if you have an issue with these rankings, you are more than welcome, more within your rights to shout at the top of your lungs. So we're not going to shout at the top of our lungs necessarily, but we will give you our thoughts on how this looks right now. Before we get to that, if you're a college football sicko, make sure you're subscribed. We got the college football playoff we're staring right in the face of. We got one more game with rivalry weekend for most of these teams. We also have conference title weekend ahead of us. Like, just be locked in here. If you love college football, we love college football. We're not in the hot takes or clickbait kind of stuff. So this is your spot. Make sure you're dialed in. Make sure you're subscribed. So let's talk about the top 25 a little bit here before we get to this top 12. Just a couple of notes here. A&M at 20. Like one of my favorite Drake songs, man. I'm still here, dog. They got 3 losses, but if they beat Texas, they punch their ticket to Atlanta. If they beat Georgia, A&M will not just make the college football playoff. They could, I think, very realistically, be a team that gets a bye in the first round of the college football playoff. Now, obviously, some of that depends on how they would jump if they beat Texas and if they beat Georgia, but I'm just saying, now, I cannot see a world where the SEC champ doesn't get a bye. So A&M just hanging around. Marcel Reed said it today. A&M is in playoff mode. A&M at 20. South Carolina at 15. Now, we'll talk more about Clemson here in a second, but Clemson being at 12 is absolutely massive. Because if South Carolina walks into Death Valley and blows the doors off of the Fighting Dabo Sweeneys, I think if you're South Carolina, you feel pretty good about your chances now to put your resume down on Selection Sunday and say, hey, we did all we could. We got a chance. Now, you got to obviously, again, be convincing because the committee keeps telling us they care about the eye test. But then you start rooting for some chaos if you do, in fact, beat Clemson by a convincing margin. The places I would look right away, this is not to dog on either of these schools, but just like I think if you're Clemson, or if you're South Carolina, rather, this is where you look. Notre Dame, you'd like to see them lose a game. Even with them being at 5 in these rankings, if they drop a game, I think it's pretty fair to say they're out with no conference title. The Iron Bowl, you don't have the head-to-head against Alabama. More on them in a second. But Bama at 13, I think is sort of a logjam for you in some way, shape, or form. But if they were to drop a game, and again, you blow out Clemson, which is a very big if for both those factors, things get very, very intriguing. Now, Clemson at 12, we just spoke to them in their game against South Carolina this weekend. I think on the flip side of what we just said with South Carolina, if you're Clemson, if you can beat South Carolina convincingly, I think you're on the doorstep. The ACC is going to get very, very weird here in the not-too-distant future. If you have a big issue with Clemson at 12, like I know some of y'all do, I'm not pushing back too much on that. With them being the 12th-ranked team, they are not going to be the 12th seed in the college football playoff if it were to start tomorrow, okay? Just so we're on the same page now. Arizona State at 16 as the highest-ranked Big 12 team, assuming they win the Big 12 conference, which, again, another assumption. We'll see what happens, but they would get that 12th seed. So, a lot to unpack here across these different these rankings. So we got Clemson at 12. Let's take a step back before we go forward into this top 12 because I think they're the team that is probably should be circled in most light-colored ink as we move forward into this final weekend of the college football season. I think Bama should feel best about their chances to backdoor their way into this thing. If they get a Clemson loss, which I've already said today on our show, I think South Carolina is going to beat Clemson. And then if Notre Dame were to lose to USC, Bama should feel pretty good about their chances to be in the dance. So there's a lot going on here, but let's reset a little bit, and we'll talk about this field right now. Again, Arizona State, as your highest-ranked Big 12 team, would be your 12 seed. Okay, so that's there. The 12th-ranked team is Clemson. Put a pin in that. We'll get to that in the future. Boise State at 11. Now, ranked 11th, they would be the 4 seed. If I'm Boise State, I'm looking around as I head down the home stretch here, and you don't have anybody within a few meters of you. If you're Boise State, the race is yours to win. You got to sprint through the tape, baby. You got to win the rest of your games, go win the Mountain West Championship, likely beat a UNLV would be who you would see in that conference championship game. And the benefit here for Boise State, UNLV is ranked in this most recent rankings of the college football playoff. So all that's to say, I don't see a world where even if Arizona State ends up blowing out whoever they see in the Big 12 title game, I don't see a world where Boise State beating a ranked team in their conference championship game would drop them out of that spot where they get a bye for the first round of the college football playoff. That's how I see it. Excited to see how this whole thing shakes out. So, Indiana at 10. A little bit surprised they dropped as far as they did. And we said this on our reaction video to the Ohio State game. I think Indiana is definitely a college football playoff team with all the chaos across the SEC if they finish the year with an 11-1 record. Like, you got the old Oaken bucket, go beat Purdue, call it a season, enjoy watching the Big Ten title game, and then get ready for the college football playoff. I don't have an issue with Indiana being in the college football playoff field right now, but I do think at the exact same time, we should all feel pretty much like we know the ceiling for Indiana. And this is not to dunk on Curt Cignetti or their operation out there. This is a team that won 3 football games last year. Like, Curt Cignetti is your head coach, not because your previous head coach went on for the NFL or got a better job. Like, you got this job because Indiana needed help. And so for Indiana to make the college football playoff in year one, if you asked anyone within a 100-mile radius that wore Hoosier gear or was in a 100-mile radius of Bloomington, Indiana, like, hey, you're going to make the college football playoff this year, they say, what are you on and can I have some? That would be their response. So Indiana, I don't think they're a national title contending team, but I think based on what they've done this year, handle business. They got smoked by Ohio State. Ohio State is, for some people's money, the best team in the country. In these rankings, they were too. No notes. No notes there. I think that's pretty much where Indiana sits. So SMU at 9. I told you we'd circle back to Clemson. SMU, I think, is in a very precarious spot. And I don't think we ever said the word precarious on this show. So precarious making its debut. I'm not so sure that I don't like Clemson's spot for the college football playoff as an at-large bid more than I like SMU's spot. Now, SMU has a chance to just kind of shut the book on this whole thing, win the ACC. They already got a spot clinched in that title game. Let's go ahead and assume that they play a Miami. If they beat Miami, like, obviously, you get yourself in the college football playoff, and this isn't even a conversation. However, with them being at 9 right now in these college football playoff rankings, it sounds like they have some cushion. They really don't, though, because 10 is Indiana. Okay, so that's one spot. Boise State at 11 is an automatic bid. And then 12 isn't really the 12th seed. The 12th spot is going to be whoever that Big 12 champion is, more than likely based on how this whole thing looks right now. So what I'm trying to say is, how much would SMU climb with a win this week over Cal? Not 100% sure. Let's go ahead and say they jump up one spot. That still makes me a little bit nervous if I were to go to the ACC title game and lose to a Miami, or heck, if you lose to a Clemson, which all Clemson needs now to make the ACC title game is a Miami loss. So keep a pulse on that. I'm curious to see how that would shake out. I don't love their at-large opportunity as much, especially with the idea that Clemson could go and have a convincing win, or just, a win to write home about over a top 15 team in South Carolina this weekend. I kind of think Clemson would bump them if SMU does not win the ACC. So SMU at 9, 10th seed, curious to watch the ACC. I watched the rankings, and I was like, man, I don't know if you get – before the rankings, I said I don't think you get more than one ACC team in advance. I'm starting to see a path where you could get 2. So that's the ACC for you with SMU at 9 and being the 10th seed. Now, Tennessee is ranked 8th, seeded 9th. The path is clear before them. Beat Vanderbilt. You're in the dance, baby. And I think the interesting thing with them is the fact that they're not playing in the SEC title game honestly could end up being the best thing for them. Get healthy, get fresh. Now, nobody in that locker room in Knoxville is saying, hey, good, we're not playing in Atlanta. That's fine. We're excited about that. No, they're competitors. They want to get it done. But from a strategic standpoint, having that rest while Georgia and call it Texas or Texas A&M go beat the heck out of each other, that might not be the worst thing in the world. The curious thing for me here, for Tennessee, I'm not so sure that we aren't taking for granted how difficult they are to match up with from a schematic standpoint. Like, the SEC has had to dial it up, on a semi-annual basis for this Josh Heupel offense and how they operate with tempo and the way they spread you out. Like, I'm not so sure if you got Tennessee in there against, right now they would play Georgia, but say Tennessee ends up playing a Notre Dame. Say Tennessee ends up drawing an Indiana or a Penn State. I don't think that they're very accustomed to what that offense would bring to the table. I think that would be a little bit of a shock value. Also, take it a step further. Look at this bracket right now. Tennessee is a spot away from hosting a college football playoff game. I mean, you want to talk about college football chaos and pageantry. You want to talk about a venue impacting the game. Put a playoff game in Neyland Stadium, and you'll be able to see that play out live and living color. So Tennessee at 8, win and you're in over Vandy. Not the easiest thing in the world to do, but the path's pretty clear nonetheless. Now at 7, Georgia, they're seeded 8th. The rankings are irrelevant here. I mean, Georgia already punched their ticket to Atlanta. Win, lose, doesn't matter. They're going to be in the college football playoff. My big thing with them is, like, what do you do when you get there? Because we've seen Georgia have some high highs. We've seen them have some low lows, man. Like, I have a hard time forgetting that first half of the Bama game, which is not aging well. I have a hard time forgetting what that Ole Miss game was. But to the exact same token, we've seen now, after both of those losses, Kirby Smart circle the wagons, rally the troops. In a foxhole, there is not many teams better than Georgia in a one-game season. And a one-game season is essentially what the college football playoff is. So I'm just saying, Georgia on some rest, Kirby Smart with a chance to maybe pump some extra bulletin board material into the guys. I don't know that I'd want to play Georgia in that first round of the college football playoff. So we'll see what happens. They want to win the SEC. I promise you, they're all about playing in Atlanta. Kirby Smart's got gold medal mentality. He's not listening to anything about we should probably take a rest. No, like, he's dialed in for it. Excited to see what they do. But again, in a one-game season, Georgia is, I think, arguably the toughest out in this whole thing. Now, at 6, you got Miami. They'd be seated 3rd based on the idea that they are the highest-ranked conference or highest-ranked from the ACC, so assuming they're the conference champion. Got to beat Syracuse to punch your ticket to play SMU in Charlotte. If they get in the dance, man, are they going to be the betting favorite to win the whole thing? No. But we discussed it on today's live show. So another reason to subscribe if you haven't already. If I'm Cam Ward, man, I'm just saying, hey, get me in the door. Get me on the field with somebody for 4 quarters in a college football playoff setting and let me do what I do, man. Like, I know Ashton Jeanty is phenomenal. We stand Ashton Jeanty on this show. Ashton Jeanty, I think, should probably, as of right now, be the second pick to win the Heisman Trophy behind Travis Hunter. I got Cam Ward at 3. But talk about a guy that can make an impact. Overall, I think Miami, if they get in the dance, should feel like they have the best quarterback. I would argue best player, biggest difference maker in the whole darn thing. So, again, are you picking them to win the whole thing? No, but I do think that if you get Cam Ward in the building in a situation where, obviously, if they get a bye, they would be playing in a controlled environment when it comes to the external circumstances of the weather and all that, like, Miami would be a force. Miami would be a force. We'll say that. Notre Dame at 5, seeded 7th. The NIU situation, the NIU loss obviously doesn't bode extremely well if you're the Fighting Irish. But, I mean, the thing I want to make sure we say here, I have Notre Dame lower in my own personal college football playoff rankings, which the good folks over at blueandgold.com let me know their disdain for those rankings. I still think Notre Dame's a playoff team. The thing that I appreciate, as much as the NIU loss is tough for Notre Dame, talk about the Texas A&M win. That was in College Station. Was it early in the year? Of course. Was A&M a different team then than they are now with Marcel Reed at quarterback? Of course, but still, like, a win is a win. When you got it, should still count. And I think that's impressive when you talk about Notre Dame. Also, they've left zero doubt. Like, they have left no room for the discussion of, I don't know, Notre Dame got the NIU loss. Are we sure they're a team that should find their way in? No, they have the number 1 margin of victory in America right now. 27 points is the average of what they're beating people by. So, again, Notre Dame, I appreciate they left no doubt. They'd be seeded 7th right now, but they're ranked 5th. Penn State at 4. This is where I start to get a little bit more of a gripe with these rankings. And I was talking to Caden Smith before we got rolling here, and he made a great point, man. Are these rankings or are these standings? Because if they're standings, Penn State at 4, cool, I get it. They got 1 loss. If they're rankings, I'm like, okay, well, Wisconsin kind of gave you some trouble, right? Now, Wisconsin gave Oregon trouble too, so we're not down on the Fighting Luke Fickles, but I'm like, okay, interesting. Back of mind, note that. Hey, Minnesota kind of gave you some trouble this past weekend, right? Yeah, all right. If we're watching the games, again, this is subjective. We got a group full of people that are watching the games and giving their take on things, so I think they've done a solid job for the most part in a pretty much no-win situation as a job. Okay, well, the Ohio State game, I get the final score was what it was, but like that could have been much more lopsided, just so we're all aligned there. I like Penn State, but if we're talking about like the best 4 teams, are we sure Penn State's at 4? I don't know. I get it. It's hard to argue with the resume, but come Selection Sunday, I wonder where you put them in relation to some of the other teams that are maybe more deserving from an eye test perspective. Now, the 2 seed, the highest ranked SEC team in these rankings, no surprise, you got Texas, or highest seeded, rather, SEC team would be Texas. They'd be the 2 seed, they're ranked 3rd. The thing that's dangerous with them to me is I think they have obviously been impressive. They also have one of the highest margin of victory ratings in the country, right around 27 points a game as well. A little bit below Notre Dame, though. The thing with them is, like, they've been handling business, but I don't think the lights are totally turned on for Texas right now offensively. Like, Quinn Ewers, as good as he is, I'm not doubting the ability, but we've seen now that he's not totally, pick whatever word you want to put in to fill in the blank there, not totally in rhythm, not totally in sync, hasn't been totally the version of himself we saw go into the big house and take over the big house early on in the season in week 2. Hasn't really been that guy, and still, Texas, been pretty convincing the way they've won these football games. If the lights do turn on for Texas at the quarterback position, all bets are off because the roster is extremely complete. Elite defense, great run game, experienced offensive line, one of the best, if not the best play caller in college football. Like, I like where Texas stands. I would be very curious to see if they can get some rhythm this week against A&M. Do they carry that over to a game against Georgia in the SEC championship game, in a situation now where we saw Georgia come to Austin, Texas, and prove a point to the entire college football public against what was then, I believe, the number 1 ranked team in America in Texas. So I'm cool with 3. Curious to see how they trend here. Massive one this weekend in College Station against A&M. Now, the top 2, no notes here. We got Oregon at 1. What are you going to say? They beat the team at number 2 in Ohio State by a point. Now, I think we're going to get a rematch here. That's going to be awesome. Here's one thing I'll say. I don't really want to speak about either Oregon or Ohio State individually. Take a look at this bracket and where things stand right now. If you're the 5 seed, would you almost rather have the 5 seed than the 1 seed? And I think the loser of the Big Ten title game will get the 5 seed, just so we're all aligned here. But if you're Ohio State, your first-round playoff game is hosting the Big 12 champ, who at this point is Arizona State. And I love Cam Skattebo. I've said it many times. I think a lot of people probably went to high school with someone who's like Cam Skattebo, gritty, hard runner, not the biggest guy, but a lot of heart, probably just an absolute animal in the weight room, beside the point. They play Arizona State, and then they would play the G5 rep in Boise State the next round. Okay, so I think the spreads, I would have to imagine, are in the neighborhood of double-digit for both those games, favoring the Big Ten runner-up in this situation, Ohio State. Look at what Oregon has to do. They'd play the winner, after getting a bye, the winner of Georgia and Tennessee. You want to play an SEC team in Georgia or Tennessee, your first college football playoff game off a bye, or would you rather play the Big 12 champ and then a G5 rep? I know which route I'd like. I know which route I'd rather have. So, no notes on who's 1 and 2 there. Obviously, Ohio State is ranked 2nd, seeded 5th, being the 2nd highest rated Big Ten team. But that's one to watch, man. One to watch with Oregon at 1. So let's try and recap it here as best we can. Clemson is ranked 12th. However, by nature of the college football playoff format, they would be bumped out because you got Arizona State at 16, but they are presumably going to be the highest, or they will be the Big 12 representation winning the Big 12 conference and find themselves at the 12 spot, bumping Clemson out, even though they're ranked 12th. At 11, you got Boise State. They would be seated 4th. At 10, you have Indiana. No issue there. They'd be seated 11th. SMU at 9 in the ranking, seated 10th. Tennessee ranked 8th, seated 9th. Georgia ranked 7th, seated 8th. Miami ranked 6th, seated 3rd, potentially being the ACC champion. Notre Dame at 5, seated 7th. Penn State at 4, seated 6th. Texas ranked 3rd, seated 2nd. Ohio State ranked 2nd, but potentially getting that money spot, seated 5th. And then Oregon, number 1 seed, number 1 ranked team. A lot to keep track of. I think you can both prefer the old college football playoff format and at the same time appreciate the heck and love with every fiber of your being out of the fact that we got a college football season now. It's going to go till January 20th. Like, this thing is just now ramping up. It breaks my heart. We got one more game left in the regular season, but this thing now is about to reset. We're going to have a brand new college football season more or less on our hands. So, I hope that was digestible for you. There's a lot to watch here in this last weekend of games. For Caden Smith on the 1s and 2s, sorting out everything that we're going through here on this show. For myself, JD PicKell, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. Back on the air tomorrow morning, now 11 a.m. Eastern, talking college football, nothing but college football year-round. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time.